Hello, darling viewers. It's Jen here at Check Her Joy. This time I'm reviewing The Twilight Man, Rod Serling and the Birth of Television, which is a graphic biography written and illustrated by Koren Shadmi, or Shadmi. I'm not trying to pronounce that. Those names are down in the description below, and also, right there. So this is a biography told in graphic novel format about Rod Serling, who created the Twilight Zone, and his time from when he entered the army during World War II through creating the Twilight Zone. It's a really interesting way to tell the story because it's actually told from Rod Serling's perspective. So we first meet Rod Serling as he's on this plane ride and he encounters this woman and they get to talking and he starts telling her his life story. They're on this really long plane. Neither one of them has anything to read, so they're both bored, so they start having this conversation. She says that she recognizes him and he looks familiar but can't place it. So he starts telling her about his time in television and about creating the Twilight Zone. So it tells his story as he's a paratrooper during World War II and just seeing the grim realities of war and how that created this very lasting impression on him. He ended up with PTSD or shell shock from his experiences and watching all his friends die and just questioning whether or not it was worth it. We also get into his time as a boxer, how he was really into it. He was really short and felt like he always had to prove himself to be like this great macho man, but also he would get beat up and pretty gruesomely. But he always had this, he always went back to telling war stories and telling stories about boxing, like those are his go-to tales. This is probably one of my favorite panels in it, in which we see Rod Serling writing a letter home to his dad on Christmas. And even though he's Jewish and doesn't celebrate Christmas, he's in the army, that's a big deal for everybody else. And it's also Rod Serling's birthday. So he's reflecting back on his life and their relationship and how he wasn't always grateful. And we find out that his dad died while he was at war, and right at the end of the war too. He was so close to getting home and seeing his dad again, and then the timing just doesn't work out. There's a lot of pain and suffering in his life, and Rod Serling definitely was dealing with shell shock, PTSD, and depression throughout his life. So then we get to see his life when he comes back from the war. He goes off to college. He does a gig as an experimental paratrooper, testing out new parachutes. But then he gets into writing, and that's really where he finds his direction and how he uses that to express himself and to sort out his feelings and his thoughts. And he really starts to find his footing in telling stories for the radio and then later in television, and how he really delights in this anthology format where you get to tell a new story every week. So it's different characters and different situations, and it gets to really be different things. We see him getting his first break, writing the story called Patterns, which is about this guy who gets hired on Wall Street, but he's being mentored by the guy that he is going to replace one day. And how then the company, once he's trained, starts trying to push the older guy out. And how that was a commentary about the time, and it's something that still happens today a lot. So he's writing these kind of timeless stories, and they're really resonating, and that's what gets him his big break. And he went from not really being able to find work as a writer to having all these opportunities, so he just grabs it and starts taking on more than he can actually probably handle. And he's got this mixed bag of some of it's good, some of it's bad. One of the projects that he does take on and becomes kind of something that he's really passionate about is the story of Emmett, who is this northern teenager, a black teenager, who went to the South and he basically catcalled this white woman. And because it's in the South, it's no, you don't look at our women, not happening. So he gets attacked by her husband and stepbrother, I think, and ends up dead. And so Rod Serling starts writing about the story. But then the ad agencies are like, we don't really want to be associated with that. Could you change this thing about it? Could you change this thing about it? Could you change something else? Until it's barely the same story. And he is so upset by this. And eventually he figures out that if he writes science fiction, if he's telling those same stories, but they're set in space, if they're set in aliens, if it's in different worlds, the ad agencies don't really pick up on it as much and don't complain as much. So he starts writing the Twilight Zone as the way to tell all these social commentary tales that he's not being allowed to tell on television otherwise. And so that becomes his break into science fiction. Like, he'd been reading comics and these fantastical stories, but it wasn't really what he was passionate about until he figured out that this was his road to do the thing that he actually cared about. And so he does end up writing the Twilight Zone because of that. And there are stories that, like, resonate today. And they're stories that we're still talking about and still, like, a part of pop culture, even though the show was only on the air for 5 years. And it was in the 50s and 60s, but, like, it still carries in and it influences so much of sci-fi and so much of television today. I also love the, like, actual art in here as the story gets darker and we start getting to see, like, the graphic format really plays a huge part in this, and getting to see his madness, I guess, which is awesome. I also love the fact that it's black and white, so it feels like it's an episode of the Twilight Zone. Like, even the story about him, the whole setup of it, of the whole graphic novel, it feels like it is an episode of the Twilight Zone itself, which is fantastic. We also see his life post-Twilight Zone and what he tried to do afterwards, working on stuff like the Night Gallery, but he gave up. He had such a struggling time that he gave up too much creative control and couldn't do what he really wanted to do with it. He also worked on the first draft of Planet of the Apes and came up with the twist ending. Even though most of it got rewritten, that ending is probably the thing that most of us remember about Planet of the Apes, and it's the part that even if you haven't seen that movie, you know that scene, and that was his work. So he had a legacy beyond the Twilight Zone, but that's definitely, like, his baby. This is just an overview, honestly. I love getting to see more about Rod Serling, learn more about the development of the Twilight Zone, which is one of the shows that I grew up watching as a kid, even before I was really old enough to understand all the commentary, and as I watch it again as an adult, and I'm like, oh yeah, all that stuff, it makes more sense. It's stories that still resonate because the social commentary is still that good. There's also a postscript, I guess, by the author about why he picked Rod Serling and his fascination with the Twilight Zone and getting into his life story. And also the different versions of the cover that he went through before he settled on this one. So I loved this. If you're a fan of the Twilight Zone, if you're a fan of Rod Serling or science fiction or just the history of television, or social causes and social commentary and how we tell those stories, I recommend this one. Sorry guys, it's almost Christmas and I just want to go do Christmas stuff. So there's my review of The Twilight Man by Koren Shadmi. Let me know in the comments below if you've read this. Are there other biographies of Rod Serling that I should check out? Or biographies in general, graphic or otherwise? Peace out. I love you guys. Keep reading and happy holidays. Bye.